Joining me now, MS Now political analyst and former Democratic Senator from Missouri, Claire McCaskill. Claire, do you agree this could be a turning point?
Well, hope springs eternal. But I remind everyone that this is something that's been going on in this institution for a long, long time. 1995, a senator from Oregon by the name of Bob Packwood was resigned in very similar, almost exact same similar circumstances. And ironically, the person who pushed him out at that point was Mitch McConnell, still a member of the United States Senate. And Mitch McConnell said at the time, the Republicans the seat, but retaining the honor of the Senate is more important. So it is depressing that that was 1995, and we're looking at this situation today. Sex and power are a toxic combination, and men in Congress too often have used power in connection with sex. And it is wrong, and it's abusive, and it's predatory. I got to say, though, it's important for me to get this out there, Chris, as somebody who prosecuted these cases for a number of years, spent many, many days in courtrooms with jury trials over cases where consent was a defense. The best thing a woman can do when she is confronted with this situation, as hard as it may seem at the moment, is reach out to a sexual assault center or a police department. There are people now in this day and age that are much better equipped to protect and serve women who have been victimized in this way. That is the best way to establish the facts of the case and the best way to establish accountability for the predators who engage in this conduct, whether they're members of Congress or in a corporate boardroom or somebody you meet at work.
I'm curious to talk a little bit more about what you said about sort of the ethical considerations of all this, because along with Swalwell, we also saw the resignation of Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez, who was accused of sexual misconduct by a staff member who later died by suicide. Some Democrats have suggested Gonzalez only left because Swalwell's resignation meant the balance of power wouldn't change, calling it an example of political horse trading. Realistically, can you take political calculations out of what should be, Claire, a clear ethical decision?
Well, frankly, one of the backdrop here in the context, Chris, which is even more depressing, is we have a guy sitting in the Oval Office saying you can grab women by the bleep. They let you if you're famous. And that's the leader, a guy who paid off a porn star months after his wife had given birth to their only child. That's their leader, a guy who was found to have committed a sexual aggression by a jury. So, and they've all been defending him now for a decade. They've all been falling in line behind him. So it's hard for me to believe that all of a sudden they're going to wake up today and go, we got to do this differently. We've got to respect women. We've got to listen to women. We've got to believe women. We've got to provide a place for women to feel safe in coming forward, regardless of the power on the other end of the equation. That's really what has to happen. But they don't have a leader. You haven't noticed him saying anything, have you? And this is obviously still a government that has covered up for Jeffrey Epstein. The victims in that case have never really had a measure of justice that they deserve.
The executive director of Gen Z for Change told the Washington Post that it had been known about Swalwell for many years. There's a number of articles about that today about what they call whispers. She says, quote, not necessarily that he was assaulting people, but that he was a creep. She argues that the Democratic Party, which of course strongly supports women's rights, needs to look inward about not acting on persistent rumors of inappropriate behavior. Is she right?
Well, I understand the point she's making, but yes, and if he was a creep, then somebody should have talked to him if they realized this kind of behavior was going on. But this is, a really murky gray area. What qualifies as a creep? And does one comment qualify as a creep? Does two? And who are the creep police? And who is in charge of policing the creeps? The best way for this to happen is to create an environment where women feel empowered and protected. And that's what the institution can do. If John Thune wants some ideas on how to do that, he can just look to what we did in the armed services, where we gave every woman, who had been subjected to any kind of sexual aggression the opportunity to report anonymously, and more important, their own lawyer, their own counselor, to help guide them through what can be a very difficult process, particularly if they don't get good advice at the very beginning of the trauma that they have endured. So that would be something that John Thune could do. And I certainly would call on the Senate to put those kinds of policies in place where women would feel more protected coming forward. That's the best police of the creeps, are the women who've been subjected to their behavior.